I was 53 years old when I finally learned the truth behind my parents' divorce. It is strange, isn't it? How a story that shaped your whole life can stay hidden from you for decades, and then one ordinary afternoon, unfold like a quiet storm you never expected. For most of my life, I carried this soft, unanswered ache inside me. I would feel it whenever I saw an old couple walking hand in hand, or when I watched families gather around a dinner table on cold winter nights. I used to look at them and wonder, why couldn't my parents be like that? What broke them so deeply that they could never repair it? Growing up, no one really explained anything to me. My mother, Ellen, only said, "Your father and I went separate ways because it was better for everyone." And my father, Michael, never spoke of it at all. Their silence became the walls of my childhood. I never pushed those walls. I just lived inside them. But the day I discovered the truth, it was a day that started like any other. I was cleaning my old childhood home, something I did once every few months to keep the dust and memories in place. The light was soft that morning, sliding through the curtains like an old friend. The house smelled of pine wood and something old, something forgotten. I remember opening a drawer in my mother's room. It wasn't a drawer I touched often. Something about it always felt private. But life has a quiet way of guiding your hands, and that day, my hand opened it without hesitation. Inside, wrapped in a fading blue handkerchief, was a small bundle of letters. My father's handwriting appeared on the top one. And my breath simply paused. For a moment, the world grew silent. Not the kind of silence you hear at night, but the kind that fills your chest, heavy, slow, almost painful. I sat down on the edge of the bed, holding that bundle like it was something fragile, something living. I whispered to myself, why would she keep these? I didn't know then that these letters held a story my parents never had the courage to tell me, a story of love, mistakes, fear, and a sacrifice deeper than I ever imagined. But I was about to learn. And once I started reading, my life changed forever. When I think back to my childhood, it feels like looking through a window that has slowly gathered dust over the years. I can still see the shapes, the moments, the outlines of memories, but some pieces are blurred, and others carry a softness that comes from time, not truth. I grew up in a small town in Virginia, a quiet place where neighbors waved from their porches, and children played until the streetlights came on. Life moved gently there. And for a long time, I believe my family did too. My mother, Ellen, was a sweet and patient woman. She had soft brown eyes that always seemed to be searching for something far away, something beyond our home. She loved gardening, especially roses. Their petals brought light into our small backyard, and she cared for them the way some people care for their dreams, with quiet devotion. I used to sit beside her as she worked, watching her hands move gracefully through the soil. She rarely spoke about her feelings, but I always felt that her gentle touch on every rose carried a story she didn't know how to share. My father, Michael, was different. He was taller than most men in our neighborhood, with a deep voice and a calmness that made people trust him without question. He worked long hours at a local manufacturing plant. I remember his boots, big, heavy, and always dusted with a thin layer of metal shavings when he came home. He would place them by the door every night, sighing as if leaving the world outside was the moment he looked forward to the most. But even as a child, I could tell something weighed on him. His smiles never reached his eyes, not even when he tried his best. I always thought my parents were simply quiet people. They didn't argue loudly, they didn't raise their voices, and they didn't slam doors. To my young mind, silence meant peace. I didn't understand then that silence can also mean distance, a distance so deep it grows like a river between two hearts. Our evenings were predictable. My mother cooked dinner, simple meals like chicken stew or baked beans with cornbread. My father would sit at the table with a newspaper, turning pages slowly. I would try to fill the silence with stories from school, but most of the time, my words floated into the air and faded there. My mother would smile at me, though. She always smiled at me. It was her way of showing she was listening even when her mind was somewhere else. There were moments, however, that still warm my heart when I think of them. I remember watching my parents dance in the kitchen once. It was a rare moment, one that felt almost magical. My mother was humming a tune from the radio, and my father gently placed his hand on her waist. She looked up at him with a shy smile, and they swayed for a few seconds before she pulled away, laughing softly. I didn't understand then why their dance was so short, but I remember thinking that maybe love was like that, short, delicate, and easily interrupted. When I was 10 years old, everything changed. My parents sat me down in the living room, both looking calm, almost too calm. My father cleared his throat and said, "We're going to live in different houses for a while." My mother placed her hand on my knee, squeezing it gently. "It doesn't change how much we love you," she said. But her voice trembled. I noticed it then, even if I couldn't name the emotion behind it. They didn't fight. They didn't cry. They didn't explain anything beyond those simple sentences. My father moved out 2 days later, taking only a small suitcase and a framed picture of me from the mantel. I watched him leave from the front window. He didn't look back. My mother and I stayed in the house. Life continued, but it felt emptier somehow. The silence that once felt ordinary now felt heavier, like a shadow that followed us from room to room. My mother tried to keep things normal. She made my lunches, helped me with homework, and reminded me to wear my jacket on cold mornings. But I would sometimes catch her staring out the kitchen window, her eyes soft with sadness, her hands resting still on the sink. As I grew older, I learned to stop asking questions. People in our town talked in hushed whispers, but no one ever told me anything. A neighbor once told my mother, "It's a shame it didn't work out." My mother only nodded. My father rarely visited, and when he did, he brought gifts that felt more like apologies. He would ask me about school, about friends, about anything except the one thing I wanted to understand: why he left. By the time I reached adulthood, I had accepted that I would never know the real reason behind their divorce. I told myself it was simply one of those things: two people grew apart, and life moved on. I built my own life, married young, and raised my children with the kind of love I had longed for as a child. Even then, though, a quiet part of me wondered what had truly broken my family apart. When my mother passed away years later, I felt another piece of that story vanish with her. She took her silence with her, and I respected that, even though it left a hollow in my heart. My father lived in another state by then, and our conversations became rare. We exchanged holiday cards and occasional phone calls, but we never spoke deeply. It was as if neither of us knew how to bridge the distance time had built between us. And then came that afternoon, the one when I found the letters. I remember the exact moment I saw my father's handwriting on the envelope. My breath caught in my throat. My hands trembled. A part of me wanted to close the drawer and walk away, to let the mystery remain untouched. But another part of me, the part that had lived with unanswered questions for more than 5 decades, knew that this was the moment life wanted me to face. The letters were old. The paper had softened with age, and the ink had faded into gentle strokes of blue. They were tied together with a thin white ribbon, the kind my mother used for her sewing projects. She must have kept them close, hidden but cherished. And that thought alone sent a quiet ache through my chest. I sat down on her bed. The room smelled like lavender, the same fragrance she always used in her drawers. The curtains fluttered slightly with the wind, brushing soft light across the floor. It felt like the house itself was holding its breath with me. Before I opened the first letter, I closed my eyes and whispered a small prayer. I didn't know what I was preparing myself for. A confession? A betrayal? A forgotten love? I only knew that whatever truth was inside those envelopes had lived longer than both my parents' marriage and my memories of that time. And I was finally ready, even at 53, to hear it. In that moment, the past was no longer far away. It was sitting right beside me, waiting to speak. And I was ready to listen. I held the bundle of letters in my hands for a long moment before I found the courage to untie the ribbon. It felt like I was holding years of quiet pain, years of love, and years of silence all at once. My mother had tied that ribbon so neatly, so carefully, almost as if she wanted these letters to stay hidden until the right moment. Maybe she believed that moment would never come. Maybe she thought the truth would only hurt me. Or maybe she hoped that one day, when I was ready, I would find them on my own. When I finally opened the first letter, my father's handwriting looked steadier than I ever remembered seeing it. His words were written with care, slow, thoughtful strokes, the kind a person uses when their heart is full and heavy at the same time. "Dear Ellen," the letter began. My breath trembled as I read it. It felt strange, reading my father's voice from so many years ago. He sounded younger somehow. Less tired. Less worn down by life. He wrote about how he missed my mother, how he missed the small laughs they used to share, and how he felt the distance growing between them like a quiet storm they never talked about. He wrote about his fears he never once admitted to me or anyone else. He worried that he was failing as a husband, failing as a father, failing as a man who wanted nothing more than to keep his family together. But what struck me most were the lines in the middle of the letter. Lines that made me stop, close my eyes, and take a slow breath. "I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted to protect our daughter from the truth we were both trying so hard to hide." I whispered the sentence out loud, as if hearing it might make it clearer. Protect me from what? What truth was he talking about? A quiet ache settled in my chest, pushing me to read faster, to search for answers. But the letter ended there, soft, incomplete, as if the rest of his feelings remained unsaid. I placed the letter gently beside me and reached for the next one. This one was dated a month later. The paper was slightly more yellowed, the ink softer. My father began this letter differently. "Ellen, I am tired of keeping this secret." I felt my heart thump slowly in my chest. The room suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls were leaning in, listening with me. He wrote about late-night arguments I had never heard. My parents had always been so quiet, so controlled. But behind the silence, there were wounds I never saw. This time, he mentioned a name. James. The moment I read it, a coldness spread through me. James? I didn't know anyone named James. Not from my childhood. Not from my family. The name felt unfamiliar and unsettling, like a stranger suddenly standing in the middle of an old memory. My father wrote. "I forgave you once, Ellen. I told myself it was a mistake made in a moment of weakness. But I don't know how to forgive the lies that came afterward." I paused, swallowing hard. My mother. The woman who cared for roses, who hummed soft tunes in the kitchen, who raised me with quiet tenderness, she had been involved with someone else. I sat there, letting the words sink into me, not with anger, but with disbelief. I had lived 53 years believing my parents were simply incompatible. Now, the truth seemed far more complicated, far more human. The next paragraph caught me even more off guard. "What hurts most is knowing you tried to pretend nothing happened. We cannot live with this unspoken thing between us. It's drifting us apart, even when we stand in the same room." I stared at those words for a long time. I remembered my parents standing in the same room so many times, silent, still, distant. Now I understood why. Silence had not been peace. It had been pain. I reached for the third letter. My hands were trembling now, but not with fear. It was something else, something closer to a need to understand, to put the pieces of my childhood into place. This letter was shorter. Written only days after the second one. "Ellen, I try to forgive. I try to forget. But I cannot pretend anymore. Every time I look at our daughter, I wonder what kind of home she is growing up in. She deserves love, not secrets, not resentment, not two parents who live beside each other but walk separate lives. He ended the letter with a single sentence. I think we need time apart. There it was. The moment everything changed. The moment the distance between my parents became something permanent. I set the letter aside and took a slow breath. My mother had kept these letters hidden all her life. She never remarried. She never spoke badly of my father. She never once hinted at what happened. Instead, she lived quietly, carrying this truth alone. Maybe she felt she deserved the silence. Or maybe she was trying to protect me even after all those years. As I continued reading letter after letter, the story grew clearer. My father had found out about my mother's emotional involvement with James, a man she had known from work. There had been no long affair, no dramatic betrayal. Just two lonely people crossing a line they shouldn't have crossed. My mother had ended it quickly, realizing her mistake. But my father, he could not unsee it. And my mother could not undo it. They tried to salvage their marriage. They tried to move forward. But my father's hurt lingered like a shadow. My mother's guilt lived beside it. And between them was me, a quiet 10-year-old girl who believed her parents simply grew apart. Halfway through the letters, I found one that made my breath catch in a way the others hadn't. It was written by my mother. Her handwriting was smaller, softer, almost hesitant. Michael, I know I broke something inside you. Something I may never be able to fix. But I want you to know that what happened was not because I stopped loving you. It happened because I stopped loving myself. I felt unseen, unheard, and I made a terrible mistake. I carry shame every day because of it. I read those words over and over again. I could almost hear her voice in them, gentle, trembling, sincere. My mother had always seemed fragile in a way I never understood. Now I realized she had been carrying more than sadness. She had been carrying regret. She continued. I wish you could see how hard I am trying. Not to erase what happened, because it cannot be erased, but to rebuild what we once had. I want our daughter to grow up in a home where love is real, even if imperfect. Her letter ended with a sentence that brought tears to my eyes. If leaving me is what helps you heal, I will not blame you. I only hope that one day, she understands that we both loved her deeply, even when we could no longer love each other the same way. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They came quietly, rolling down my face, falling onto the letters. I wiped them gently, afraid to damage the words that held so much of my parents' hearts. The more I read, the more human they became, not just Mom and Dad, but Ellen and Michael, two people who had loved, struggled, stumbled, and tried. Two people who weren't perfect. Two people who had done their best, even when their best had been fragile. The last few letters were practical ones, discussing the separation, my school schedule, the days my father would visit, the way they hoped to keep my life peaceful. There was no anger in those letters. Only sadness. Only love tangled with disappointment. One line from my father stood out. I will always be her father. And you will always be her mother. Divorce cannot change that. And a line from my mother. Thank you for promising to be gentle with her heart. I sat there for a long time after reading the final letter. The house felt incredibly quiet, almost sacred. I realized then that all these years, I had blamed fate for my parents' divorce. I believed they simply weren't meant to be together. But now I saw the truth, it wasn't fate. It was pain. It was fear. It was human imperfection. I stood up slowly, carrying the letters with me to the window. The sunlight touched them, warming the paper as if trying to comfort the words. I traced my mother's handwriting with my fingertip. She had carried her guilt in silence, never wanting to burden me with the truth. My father had carried his pain with dignity, never letting it turn into hatred. And I had carried the confusion of a child who didn't know the story behind the silence. At that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not bitterness. But understanding. A gentle, aching understanding of two people who had loved me, and each other, in their own imperfect ways. But there was more to uncover. I could feel it in the depth of the letters, in the spaces between their words. There was something neither of them had said directly, something still hidden. And I knew that the only person who could give me the missing piece of the truth was the one person still alive. My father. Turning point. For the rest of that afternoon, I couldn't focus on anything except the letters. I walked through the house in silence, carrying them close to my chest as if they were pieces of my childhood I had finally been allowed to touch. Every room reminded me of moments I had once thought were simple, but now understood were layered with feelings I never saw. My mother's quiet humming, my father's heavy sighs, the lingering glances they exchanged without speaking, everything had meaning now. The sun had already begun to set when I finally gathered myself enough to make a decision. I needed to talk to my father. Not as a child asking questions, but as a grown woman ready to understand. Ready to hear his truth. Ready to see him not as the distant figure I remembered, but as a man who had once loved deeply and hurt silently. I sat on my mother's bed, holding my phone. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed his number. I had his contact saved under Dad, though we rarely spoke. Our conversations were short, birthday wishes, holiday greetings, polite check-ins. Nothing like what I was about to ask of him now. The phone rang 3 times before he answered. Hello. His voice was older than I remembered. Softer. Time had wrapped itself around his words, making them slower, gentler. Dad, it's me, I said quietly. Hello, sweetheart. He sounded surprised. Is everything all right? I took a slow breath. I found something. In Mom's room. There was a pause. A long, heavy pause that told me he already knew what I had found. The letters? He asked softly. My heart tightened. Yes. Another silence filled the line, but this one felt different. Not avoiding. Not resisting. It felt like he was gathering the courage he hadn't needed in decades. I knew you would find them one day, he said finally. Why didn't either of you tell me? I whispered. He exhaled deeply, the sound trembling with years of unspoken memories. Because you were our daughter. And children shouldn't have to carry the weight of their parents' mistakes. I felt tears slowly pool in my eyes. I carried the confusion anyway, I replied. For my whole life. He stayed quiet. Not because he didn't care, but because he was feeling everything I was saying. Dad, I said gently, I need to understand. Not as your child. As a woman who has lived 53 years wondering why her family broke apart. He sighed again, this time with a softness that felt like surrender. Then come see me, he said. There are things I never wrote in those letters. Things your mother never could say. You deserve to know them. So I went. It was a 3-hour drive to his house in North Carolina. I remember the road stretching long and quiet, lined with old trees that seemed to sway with the weight of the story I was about to hear. The sky was overcast, the kind of day when light feels muted, and the world seems quieter than usual. It felt right, almost as if nature knew I needed stillness. When I arrived, my father opened the door before I even knocked. His hair was fully gray now, and the lines around his eyes had deepened. But when he smiled, I recognized a softness I hadn't seen since I was a child. Come in, sweetheart. I stepped inside. His home was small, neat, and filled with simple things. A soft rug. A worn armchair. Pictures of me on the shelves, more than I expected. More than he ever showed me. He led me to the living room, and we sat opposite each other. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just breathed in the silence between us, a silence that had lasted decades. Finally, he looked at me with eyes full of something fragile. You read the letters? Yes. And you have questions? Yes. He nodded slowly, folding his hands in his lap. Your mother was not a bad woman, he began. She made a mistake. A painful one. But she never stopped loving you. Or me. I know, I said quietly. I could feel that in the letters. He gave a small, sad smile. I'm glad. I leaned forward. Dad, who was James? And what happened that made everything fall apart? My father closed his eyes for a moment, as if he were choosing each word with care. James was a coworker. A kind man. Someone your mother talked to when she felt lonely. He looked at his hands. She wasn't looking for love. She was looking for understanding. It took a moment for that to settle in me. She told me about it, he continued. She came to me crying one night, saying she had crossed a line. She said it stopped immediately, that she regretted it the moment it happened. Did you believe her? I asked softly. Yes, he said. I believed her. But believing and forgetting are two very different things. I nodded slowly. I could feel his pain, even after all these years. What happened after that? I asked. He looked out the window, his voice becoming quieter. We tried to move past it. Truly, we did. Your mother tried harder than anyone I've ever known. She apologized. She changed her routines. She did everything she could to rebuild something she was terrified she had broken. But his voice cracked slightly. I didn't know how to let go. For the first time in my life, I saw vulnerability in him. Real, raw vulnerability. I loved her, he said softly. But every time she smiled at me, I wondered if she had smiled at him the same way. Every time she touched my hand, I wondered if she had touched him. It consumed me quietly. I never yelled. I never accused. But inside, I couldn't find peace. A quiet tear slid down his cheek, and he wiped it with the back of his hand. I hurt her with my silence, he continued. She hurt me with her mistake. And between the two of us, there was no space left for healing. I swallowed gently. Dad, why did you leave? Why didn't you try longer? He took a deep breath, one that seemed to reach into years he had tried to forget. Because, he said, his voice trembling, I found out something else. My heart stilled. What? I whispered. He looked at me deeply, as though he needed me to be strong enough to hear the truth. Your mother was sick. The words hit me like a cold wave. Sick. I repeated. He nodded. She didn't want you to know. She didn't want anyone to know. She started having symptoms, long before the divorce. Headaches. Fatigue. Memory lapses. She thought it was stress. But the doctors found something else. My breath felt trapped in my chest. What was it? A neurological condition, he said softly. Slow, progressive, unpredictable. My mind buzzed. My mother had never told me. She had always seemed tired, but I had chalked it up to life. She made me promise not to tell you, he continued. She didn't want you to grow up worrying. She didn't want her illness to overshadow your childhood. I felt warm tears forming in my eyes. But what does her illness have to do with the divorce? He looked down. She knew she wouldn't be the same. She knew she would get weaker over time. She wanted you to grow up somewhere stable. Somewhere calm. And she thought I could not forgive her enough to give you that stability. I covered my mouth with my hand as the truth slowly cracked open inside me. She asked me to leave, he said, barely above a whisper. My world spun. What? My voice trembled. Mom asked you to leave. He nodded. Not because she didn't love us. But because she believed that if we stayed together, the weight of everything, her mistake, my pain, her illness, would destroy the home you were growing up in. She thought separation would give you a better chance at a peaceful childhood. I felt myself shaking. All these years, I believed my father walked away. But the truth was far more heartbreaking. She wanted you to see me regularly, he said. She insisted I stay in your life. But she also insisted that I keep the reason to myself. She didn't want you to carry guilt. Or pain. Or confusion. My tears blurred the room around me. Why didn't you tell me after she passed away? I whispered. He looked at me with eyes full of grief and love. Because even after she was gone, I wanted to honor her wishes. I broke. The tears came in quiet waves, not from anger, but from the overwhelming truth that my parents had loved me more deeply than I had ever known. My father leaned forward and took my hand gently. Your mother wasn't perfect, he said. And neither was I. But everything we did, every choice we made, was to keep your heart safe. I held his hand tightly, feeling the years of distance dissolve between us. For the first time in my life, I saw not the brokenness of my parents' marriage, but the sacrifice behind it. My father then said something I will never forget. You were the one thing we both did right. Those words wrapped around my heart like a warm blanket, soothing wounds I didn't even realize I still carried. In that moment, I finally understood my parents. Not as symbols of divorce or silence, but as two human beings trying their best in a world that often gives no easy choices. I looked at my father through my tears and whispered, "Thank you for telling me." And he replied, with a trembling smile, "Thank you for listening." Resolution. My father and I sat together for a long time after he told me everything. Neither of us spoke much. We simply shared the same quiet space, breathing slowly, letting the truth settle between us like the gentle dust of years finally coming to rest. I could feel something shifting inside me, something heavy loosening its grip, something fragile finding peace. I looked over at him, noticing how much older he had become. The lines around his eyes, the slight tremble in his hands, the way his shoulders curved inward as if life had pressed down gently over time, and yet, despite all of that, there was a softness to him that I had never seen when I was a child. Maybe age had softened him. Maybe truth had. Maybe this moment, this long overdue conversation, was giving him the chance to let go, too. Dad, I said quietly, did you ever think of coming back? After the divorce? He took a slow breath. Every single day for the first few years. Then why didn't you? His answer came with no hesitation. Because she asked me not to. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't angry. He was simply telling the truth, the kind that carries no weight except the weight of memory. She said it would confuse you, he continued. She wanted you to have stability. She wanted your routines to stay the same. And she felt that my coming back and then leaving again, as her illness progressed, would only hurt you more. My heart sank with a mixture of sorrow and admiration. My mother had quietly protected me from a world of fear and uncertainty. She had chosen to shield me even if it meant carrying her battles alone. She was strong, I whispered. She was the strongest person I ever knew, he replied. We fell silent again. I looked at the window, noticing the soft light of late afternoon spreading across the floor. It seemed peaceful, almost like the house was sighing with relief that two people inside it were finally mending something that had been broken for decades. My father stood slowly. I want to show you something, he said. He led me down the hallway to a small room I had never seen before. He switched on the light, revealing shelves filled with photo albums, old boxes, and letters. It looked like a room dedicated to the past, quiet, organized, gentle. He walked over to one of the shelves and pulled down a small wooden box. It was smooth and polished, the kind craftsmen make with care. He held it for a moment before handing it to me. "This was your mother's," he said. I opened the box slowly. Inside were small keepsakes, things that seemed ordinary but held stories of their own. A dried rose petal from their wedding day. A delicate silver chain I remembered her wearing when I was a child. A folded piece of fabric from her favorite dress. And at the very bottom, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was a small card. I lifted it gently. It was a note. My mother's handwriting. "To my daughter, when she is ready." My heart trembled. I hadn't expected this. I didn't even know she had written me anything. "Do you want to read it now?" my father asked softly. I nodded. I unfolded the note, the paper fragile with age. "My dear girl. If you are reading this, it means life has brought you to a moment of truth. I hope your heart is strong. I hope you are ready to see me as a woman, not just a mother. I made mistakes in my life, mistakes that came from loneliness, fear, and not knowing how to ask for help. But my love for you has always been the truest and purest thing inside me. Please forgive me, not for what I did, but for what I could not tell you. I stayed silent to protect your childhood. I hope you can understand. Love always. Mom." I felt a warmth spread across my chest, followed by a soft ache. The kind of ache that comes when your heart is breaking but healing at the same time. I pressed the note against my chest, closing my eyes. "She loved you," my father whispered. "More than anything." "I know," I said, wiping a tear. "I can feel it in her words." He nodded slowly. "She wanted to tell you, you know. Many times. But every time she looked at you, she chose to protect you instead." A deep breath filled my lungs. "I wish she had told me," I said quietly. "I wish I could have held her hand through it." He looked down. "She didn't want your childhood to become her illness." As he said that, something inside me softened, like a knot slowly loosening after decades of tension. I realized that my mother's silence wasn't a wall. It was a gift. A difficult, painful gift she gave me so I could grow without fear. I closed the wooden box gently. "Thank you for keeping this," I told my father. "I kept everything she left for you," he replied. "I knew one day, you'd need it." We walked back to the living room, and he made us tea, something simple, warm, grounding. The steam drifted into the air like memories rising from the past. We sat quietly, sipping our tea, both of us lost in our own thoughts yet connected in a way we hadn't been for years. After a few minutes, I placed my cup down. "Dad," I said gently, "did you ever forgive her?" He looked into his cup, his reflection trembling in the surface. "I forgave her long before the divorce," he said softly. "But I didn't know how to live with the hurt. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting." I nodded. "No. It isn't." He leaned back slowly. "But after she got sick, after I saw how strong she tried to be, after I realized she wasn't fighting just for herself but for you, something inside me changed." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I visited her," he said quietly. My heart stilled. "You did. Many times. She didn't want you to know. But I went to help her when she needed it. With doctor appointments. With groceries. With things around the house." Tears filled my eyes again, but this time they were warm, grateful tears. "You still cared for her," I whispered. Of course I did, he said. I loved her. Even after everything. Some love doesn't disappear, even when two people cannot stay together. My throat tightened. Why didn't you tell me? He gave a faint smile. Because she didn't want you to see her that way. She wanted you to remember her strong. I wiped my cheek. She was strong. He nodded. Yes. Stronger than either of us. We sat quietly for a while, the room wrapped in a peaceful stillness that felt almost sacred. I could feel something lifting, something that had lived inside me for decades, something I never had words for. It wasn't just confusion. It was longing. The longing of a child who wanted to understand her family, to understand the silence she grew up with. Now, for the first time, I finally did. I looked at my father and said softly, "I'm glad you told me." He reached across the table, placing his hand over mine. I carried this truth for a long time. I always feared the day you would ask. But now I feel like I can breathe again. His voice trembled. Thank you for letting me share it. Thank you for listening, without anger. I squeezed his hand. There's no room for anger, Dad. Only understanding. His eyes glistened. Your mother always said you had a gentle heart. Hearing that made my chest tighten in a tender way. My mother's words lived inside me now, guiding me gently even though she was gone. I stayed with my father the rest of the evening. We talked about small things, memories, childhood stories, things we never shared before. It felt healing, like stitching together loose threads that had been waiting for years to be tied. When it was finally time for me to leave, my father walked me to the door. The porch light glowed softly behind him. Come visit again, he said. I will, I promised. And I meant it. As I drove home, the sky was dark, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt calm. Peaceful. Like the world was giving me space to breathe. I opened the window slightly, letting the cool air brush against my face. My heart felt full, filled with truth, with understanding, with the kind of gentle sorrow that heals rather than hurts. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel caught between my parents' silence. I felt connected to both of them. I understood their pain. I understood their love. And I understood that their divorce wasn't about failure or betrayal. It was about sacrifice. It was about love in its most complicated form. It was about two imperfect people doing the best they could in a world where choices are never simple. By the time I reached home, I felt lighter, like a chapter of my life had finally closed, not with bitterness, but with grace. And I knew, deep in my heart, that this journey had not ended. It had just begun. Ending. When I woke up the next morning, the world looked a little different. Not brighter, not louder, just clearer. As if the clouds in my heart had finally parted and allowed a softer kind of light to come through. I sat by my bedroom window with a cup of warm tea, watching the leaves sway gently outside. The air was cool, the sky was pale, and everything felt calm in a way I hadn't felt in years. I thought about my mother. I pictured her tending to her roses in the backyard, humming gently as she brushed dirt from her hands. I pictured her quiet smile at the dinner table, the way she touched my hair before school, the way she listened even when she didn't have the words to respond. For so long, I saw her as fragile. But now I saw her strength. A quiet, resilient strength she carried alone, without ever letting it cast a shadow over my childhood. And I thought about my father. The man who stayed silent, not out of coldness, but out of love. The man who carried his pain without letting it turn into anger. The man who stepped back from the life he loved because he believed it would protect the people he loved more. His silence was not distance. It was sacrifice. I realized then that the story of my parents was not a tragedy. It was a human story, full of mistakes and forgiveness, fear and courage, silence and love. They were not perfect. They didn't have all the answers. But they tried. They tried with the hearts they had. And sometimes, that has to be enough. Later that evening, I placed my mother's note on my bedside table. I read it again slowly, letting her words settle into the empty spaces of my heart. If you are reading this, it means life has brought you to a moment of truth. She was right. And the truth did not break me. It shaped me. It helped me grow into a woman who understands that love isn't always loud. Sometimes, love is quiet. Sometimes, love is choosing what hurts you for the sake of someone else's peace. Sometimes, love is letting go. A few days later, I visited my father again. This time, I didn't come with questions. I came with gratitude. We took a walk around his neighborhood, our steps slow and steady. He told me stories from his younger days, stories he never shared before. I listened, not as a child, but as someone finally able to understand the man he truly was. Before I left, I hugged him, a long, warm hug that said more than words ever could. And he whispered, "Your mother would be proud of you." That sentence stayed with me for a long time. In the weeks that followed, I found myself healing in small ways, gentle ways. I forgave my mother, not because she asked for it, but because she deserved it. I forgave my father, not because he needed it, but because I did. And I forgave myself, too, for building stories in my head that were never true, for carrying confusion I never asked for. One afternoon, I returned to my childhood home. I walked through the quiet rooms, touched the walls, stood in the garden where my mother once planted her roses. I whispered a soft thank you to the wind, thank you for the truth, for the love, for the years that shaped me. Then I closed the door gently behind me. I realized then that life doesn't always give us perfect families. It doesn't give us perfect answers. But it gives us moments, moments of truth, moments of understanding, moments that help us see the people we love not through the lens of childhood, but through the eyes of compassion. My parents were not perfect. But they were mine. And their love, complicated, quiet, and flawed, made me who I am. As I walked away from the house, the sun began to set, painting the sky with soft shades of gold and pink. It looked peaceful. It looked like closure. And for the first time in my life, my heart felt light.